Have you ever noticed that in any good novel or in any great movie, there is this moment when the ordinary, everyday life of the main characters is interrupted, and suddenly there is this obstacle that they must overcome. It's usually an event that's kind of out of the control of the characters, but that moves them into action, that sets them off on this life-changing journey that we get to watch and follow along. Writers actually have a name that they often call this moment. They call it the inciting incident. If you've ever read or watched Romeo and Juliet, then the inciting incident is when the two characters from rival families first meet and fall in love. In Batman Begins, it's the death of Bruce Wayne's parents that set him off in his direction. In Finding Nemo, it's when Nemo is taken by divers from the ocean. Sorry, I probably should have said spoiler alert, just in case you hadn't seen those. But I think you get what I'm saying here. The inciting incident upsets the status quo, and it spurs the story's movement forward. Last week, we began exploring together the grand story of God's people's journey from Egypt in the Exodus. We said together that really every journey just has three parts: a start, a finish, and the middle. Today, we are going to focus our attention on the start. And there we will discover the inciting incident that set everything in motion for them. We will see that their lives were interrupted and an obstacle was revealed that they must overcome. We'll see that they too have their status quo upset, which sets them off on this life-changing journey that we not only get to watch and follow along, but that we get to learn from. And so, let's go back to the start. As this story opens, we find that God's people are living out their lives in Egypt, their home. They have been living in this place for hundreds of years at this point. It's the only place that this generation of people have ever known. And it was a home that for a very long time was very good to them. Initially, Egypt had been a refuge for them during a time of great famine. Joseph, an Israelite, had helped Pharaoh prepare for this disaster, helping him store up so much food that they lost count of it. And so when the famine came and it hit where Joseph's family lived in Canaan, Pharaoh not only allowed all 66 members of his family to come and to live with Joseph in Egypt, but he rolled out the red carpet for them. He said, you can come and you can enjoy all the fat of the land, and you don't even need to bring anything with you because the best that we have will be yours. That's a pretty warm welcome. But to top it all off, they also gave them the best of the land in Egypt to live, an agriculturally rich place called Goshen. It's quite the oasis there in Egypt. That's 95% sand and stone and desert. This lush setting provided plenty of grass for pasture, which allowed this family to do what they had always done, be shepherds. Truth be told, the Egyptians weren't really fond of this kind of work. They didn't want any part of it. And so God's people were pretty much left alone to have this little slice of paradise all to themselves. As the years went by, this small group of people who had settled there thrived in Egypt. They greatly increased in number and they filled the land. Life was good for them there. All was well. That is, until one day when the Bible tells us a new Pharaoh rose to power who did not know Joseph. Now, this is probably not talking about the very next Pharaoh in timeline. It's probably talking about a changeover in power, a new dynasty coming into being. And so this is likely happening after a considerable amount of time, which tells us that, no, it's not surprising that this new Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph. He's probably been dead for a number of years. But this word that's being translated know here means so much more than personally knowing someone, having an acquaintance with them. What this word truly means is having a commitment to someone. It's about having a concern for their well-being. And so this new Pharaoh, even though he might have heard about this man named Joseph and how he had saved Egypt and how all of his people still lived there in the land, quite frankly, as he heard that, he didn't care. This new Pharaoh, he had no commitment to Joseph and his people. He had no concern for Joseph and his people. He quite frankly looked at them and they meant nothing to him. He only sees one thing when he looks at this large group of people living in his land: a problem. A problem that must be shrewdly dealt with lest they rise up and overpower him. And so perhaps you remember how this story goes. First, he tries to contain them by taking their freedom away, making them his slaves. He puts overseers and masters over them who force them to build mud brick structures. Most likely what they would build would be warehouses for temples, where the offerings would be stored for the gods so that anyone who needed one when they came to worship would have one available to them. Parts of these structures are still standing today. Historical documents, they help us to understand a little bit of what life would have been like for slaves in Egypt. There are some differences in what we're most familiar with today. I think most of us, when we hear slavery, we think of the chattel slavery that was practiced here in the Americas. And kind of in contrast to that, the Israelites' experience in Egypt would have had some distinctions. It's most likely that they would have been paid for their work, not a whole lot, but enough so that they could get by, not enough so that they could advance themselves. But their work did offer something desirable to them. It offered them job security that provided for their families. It appears that they would have worked about 8 hours a day and that they would have had weekends off in the 10-day Egyptian calendar. But all that being said, of course, any kind of forced labor, any kind of slavery against a will of any person is reprehensible. The Israelites were still a part of this unjust, unfair system that was designed to subjugate them. Their masters were often brutal with them, mocking them, making their jobs more difficult, beating them. The freedom that the Israelites had enjoyed since coming to Egypt to live in Goshen on their own and to do what they had always done as shepherds was suddenly ripped away from them. And Pharaoh hoped that this would break them. He hoped that this would not only give him greater control over them, but that it would dwindle their numbers. However, guess what? The more that he oppressed them, the more they continued to multiply and grow in number. And so the Pharaoh makes another attempt. In addition to taking away their freedom, he then tries to stop their fruitfulness. He enlists the help of two people, two Hebrew midwives, and he instructs them to kill every male Hebrew child as he is coming into the world. Now, this was a devious strategy that would have devastated family after family after family until it finally devastated the whole people of God. However, yet again, the Hebrew people continued to grow in number because these midwives did not listen to him. And so, frustrated at this point, Pharaoh, he takes yet another run at them. He has tried to take away their freedom. He has tried to stop their fruitfulness. And so now he intensifies his efforts and he tries to destroy their future by calling on all of his people, everyone, to kill male Hebrew infants, commanding that they be thrown into the Nile. The arrival of this new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph is the inciting incident that interrupts the lives of the people of Israel in Egypt. Confronted with his acts of aggression, suddenly they have to ask themselves, how are we going to respond to this obstacle? This obstacle that is standing in the way of the freedom and the fruitfulness and the future that God so wants for us. In Exodus 2, we get our first glimpse of their response to this obstacle. It tells us during this long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. The journey of the Israelites begins with this one response: longing for deliverance. As we said last week, every journey starts with this one thing. It starts with honesty. And as the Israelites cry out to God and they dare to name their longing to him, that's what happens. They get honest. They get honest that there is a problem. They get honest that they need help beyond themselves. They get honest that they need God to lead them somewhere beyond and better than where they find themselves in this moment. I think that it's fair to say that the pandemic that we have all encountered this past year has been an inciting incident for us. Our lives have been interrupted, and it has revealed to us new obstacles that we must overcome. Obstacles outside of us, certainly. The obstacle of the virus itself and how we are going to navigate life now. But I think if we get honest, that some obstacles have also been revealed within us. Obstacles like fear or anger, anxiety or depression, selfishness or impatience, codependence, or any other number of hurts or habits or hang-ups that are robbing us of the freedom and the fruitfulness and the future that God so wants for us. The inciting incident of the pandemic has made these obstacles that were perhaps there before glaringly obvious. And it's highlighted our own deep need for help beyond ourselves. And so I'm going to guess that if we do get honest, that many of us have found ourselves longing like the Israelites, for God to deliver us. However, as we will soon see, the Israelites are going to have to decide just how much they want deliverance, as will we. You see, God is faithful. He hears their cries. He has concern for them. And so he raises up the leader Moses to lead them. He raises him up to lead them not only away from Egypt, but to the promised land, this land that is flowing with milk and honey, this place where God will be their God and they will be his people, this place where they will be free and will become a great nation. But it almost instantly becomes clear that it's not going to be an easy road to get there. Moses goes to Pharaoh, and in his very first attempt to ask him to let the people go, Pharaoh not only tells him no, but he harshly punishes them because of this request. The very next day, they go to work and they have the straw taken away that they need to make their mud bricks. They're asked to gather it up themselves. But at the same moment, they're expected to meet the same quota as the day before. And when that just isn't possible, then they're mocked and beaten. Still, Moses, he comes to the people and he assures them, God is with you and he is going to lead you to the promised land. But this is what it says in Exodus 6. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him. They did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. At the first signs of resistance, the people of God are ready to give up on deliverance. Sure, life in Egypt isn't great at the moment, but it isn't all bad, they reason. You know, they've got this beautiful place to live in Goshen. Their work provides for their families, and at least they know what to expect there. There are just too many what ifs to take a step forward toward the promised land. It just seems much wiser to stay right here where they are. Here where it's far from perfect, but at least is home to them. There's always a sense of safety in staying where we are, isn't there? The what ifs of change can overwhelm us before we ever take our first step forward. What if I fail? What if I disappoint others? What if I just don't have what it takes to overcome these obstacles? And so we stay where we are in the safety of what we know, trading what we are longing for counterfeit control. But here's what we can know. There will always be resistance on the road to deliverance. Just as much as we long for change, we can expect that the what ifs are going to try their best to get us to play it safe. And so what if we learn to beat these what ifs at their very own game by conceding to them right out of the gate? What if, before we ever got started, we just accepted that there are going to be some failures, but we made peace with that, knowing that we are following a God of second and third and fourth and fifth chances? What if, before we ever took our first step, that we acknowledged that there are going to be some people who are disappointed in us, likely people who benefit from us staying where we are, who benefit from us staying fearful or angry, anxious or depressed, selfish or impatient or codependent, people who benefit from our enslavement. But what if, we accepted that there's going to be this disappointment and we made peace with it, knowing that the full life that God wants for us is so much more valuable than anyone else's applause or approval? What if we expected from the start that we just are not going to have what it takes to overcome this obstacle by ourselves? But we made peace with that, knowing that the power of God that is at work within us is able to do infinitely more than we could ever ask or imagine. The what ifs that tether us to safety, they lose their power when we welcome them as a necessary part of getting from where we are to where we long to go. There will always be resistance on the road to deliverance. And so inevitably, the question that will come to us is this: is it worth it? We only know what we know. And so it's easy for us to try to stay safe where we are. However, it is just as much true that we don't know that what we don't know. It's hard for us to imagine just how full and abundant the life is that we find ourselves longing for. But it is this picture of what we're longing for, this picture of the freedom and the fruitfulness and the future that God so wants for us, that will keep us moving forward with great hope even when it gets difficult. Dr. Edith Eger, who endured the Auschwitz concentration camp and who has committed her life to finding liberation for herself and for others, this is what she says: change is about interrupting the habits and patterns that no longer serve us. If you want to meaningfully alter your life, you don't simply abandon a dysfunctional habit or belief, you replace it with a healthy one. You choose what you're moving toward. You find an arrow and follow it. As you begin your journey, it's important to reflect not only on what you'd like to be free from, but on what you want to be free to do or become. Think about that for a moment. What is the good destination that God is putting before you that makes the journey, that makes the resistance on the road to deliverance more than worth it? Throughout Jesus' ministry, ordinary people like us experienced deliverance as they found the courage to move out of their safety and to boldly name their longing to Jesus. Matthew chapter 8 gives us kind of a summary, a picture of Jesus' healing ministry. And in that one chapter, we see that there's a leper that comes to Jesus saying, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And with a touch, his leprosy is gone. A centurion comes to Jesus and says that his servant is paralyzed. And when Jesus asks if he needs him to go to him, the servant says to him, "Just say the word and my servant will be healed." And so Jesus speaks this servant's body to wholeness. People who are sick and demon-possessed come longing to be transformed by Jesus, and Jesus responds. He goes to work helping them overcome the obstacles in their lives. Again and again and again, we see that when we name our longings to Jesus, it is a catalytic moment. And it opens up the way for us to experience God's healing power in the place of our deepest need. And so, if Jesus were standing right in front of you today, what would you ask for him to do for you? What are you longing for? What has the inciting incident of this pandemic uncovered in your life that needs to be overcome so that you can experience a fuller life with God and with others? In just a moment, I'm going to guide us in a time of reflection that's going to guide us to get honest and to name our longing to Jesus. But before we do that, I'd like for you to hear from a few people in our congregation who have found that courage to get curious about their longing and who have named that to Jesus, and in doing so, taken their first step in the journey of deliverance.
During the pandemic, I've learned a lot about myself, a lot about my family. I think that happens when you're stuck in a house with them for long periods of time. But I found that I spend more time trying to look like the person that I want to be, and less time actually trying to do the things that will get me to be the person that I want to be. My wife bought a shirt during the pandemic. It says, "I'm fine, it's fine, everything's fine." And obviously it's a sarcastic shirt, but I feel like it very much describes me a lot of times and my efforts to be perceived as somebody who's got it all together and doesn't have issues, doesn't have weaknesses, doesn't have struggles. And I think that's been a problem in my life, is always thinking that strength and weakness are polar opposites. Very, very slowly, before the pandemic and now into the pandemic, I'm starting to make the connection that strength and weakness are actually aligned very, very close. The ability to accept your weaknesses, accept your failures, accept your worries, and be vulnerable in them is actually true strength.
I think for me, during the pandemic, I had a hard time feeling like I mattered a whole lot, or I had anything to offer, or that people really did care about me. So I had to really get into that and think about that and look at that, because it wasn't a very good place to be. The bright side of it is I realized that people do care, that I have value, that I'm loved, that I don't have to do something for somebody for them to love me. I don't have to be anybody but who I am and just show up, and that's good enough. And that is good enough.
The pandemic has taught me that change is okay. I'm a change-resistant person and a person of routine. And last year, when not only I had to change my schedule around, but I had to change every aspect of my life, I learned that I needed to slow down. And I know that now because I appreciate the pace of life a lot more this year than I did pre-pandemic. I learned that I needed more family time than what I originally thought was a sufficient amount. And so through all of these changes that have affected my life, I've learned that one of the constants is the love from others, the love from God. And I appreciate the ways that love comes out in new and unexpected ways. And for that, I am very thankful.
So the first day we show up, there's a table, we're all sitting there staring at each other, so there's no place to hide. And I remember looking down at the first question and thinking, oh crap, this is gonna be tough. How am I gonna answer this tough question and come out looking like I've got it all together? And I remember looking over at Pastor Wayne and thinking, I know what I'm gonna do. Pastor Wayne is gonna have an amazing answer. And I'm gonna slowly just kind of cherry pick some of his things he says and morph it into my own answer, and then I'm gonna scoot right through, smooth as can be. If you know Pastor Wayne, he did not take the easy way out on a hard question. He came out completely vulnerable. He talked about weaknesses, struggles, worries, fears, things in his life that he thought he had failed at, things that he thought he was currently failing at. And I remember in that moment, it being like a light bulb in my head saying that I have got to get there. I've got to get to where he is, to where I can be true to myself. And just thinking about the possibilities of what my life could be like if I take my walls down and let people in.